welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gameock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kaye. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Plays it in at the buzzer! That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into a powerhouse edition of Gamecock Pod Live. I am Keith Alsep. It is August the 28th, and we are just 3 days away from South Carolina football. College football, oh, how we missed you, and oh, how you delivered last Saturday in week 0. 3 of the 4 games played decided in the final 90 seconds of action. You had Georgia Tech with the walk-off field goal and the upset of number 10 Florida State to start it all off. Then you had SMU rallying and scoring the game-winning touchdown with under 90 seconds to go. And then New Mexico led Montana State 31-14 and led by 2 scores with under 5 minutes to go. And Montana State scored the game-winning touchdown with 10 seconds to go in that one. We don't want to see that kind of game Saturday afternoon in Williams-Brice Stadium. So let's get rolling with our Nana's Porch Countdown to Kickoff, brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, Fort Mill, Rock Hill, Lancaster area. I'm talking about Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, or the big backyard bash with a whole hog barbecue. Nana's Porch has got you covered. Maybe you want to order some food for a big tailgate, or maybe you're having a big watch party for week 2 when South Carolina travels to Lexington, Kentucky. Call Nana's Porch, see if they can hook you up, and make sure to order several tubs of the award-winning pimento cheese, having been voted 2 of the last 3 years number 1, and last year number 1 and number 2 in the meat and cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. I strongly urge you to support this Gamecock-owned and operated business by going to nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. Tell my good friend Chris Payne, the Cockfather, sent you. You'll love it. I guarantee it. All right, we've been counting it down every day to kick off with 1 or 2 players. Let's go back to last Saturday, 7 days away. Of course, that was none other than Jadeveon Clowney. On Sunday, when we did the morning after, it was Melvin Ingram. Another favorite player of mine to wear number 6, Norman Green from Sumter, a tremendous defensive back. Then at number 5, Stephon Gilmore. I mean, what a collegiate and professional career he's had. Yesterday, number 4 was Gaffney native Sidney Rice And today, with 3 days away, it is West Orange, New Jersey running back Corey Boyd. He was the team's leading rusher in 2006 and 2007. He was recruited by Dave Roberts and Lou Holtz to come to South Carolina. He had a career high 160 yards versus Tennessee in an overtime loss in 2007 when South Carolina made a furious comeback and then Ryan Suckett missed a kick in overtime. But Corey Boyd, 10th all-time in carries, 464. He had 2,267 career rushing yards. He averaged 5 yards per carry for his career, and he tied for 7th all-time in rushing touchdowns with 23, and he had 106 yards in that tremendous win at Clemson in 2006. All right, let's go ahead and bring in the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, John Whittle from the Big Spur. John, how's it going? Are you getting?
I'm doing great, Keith. Appreciate you having me.
Man, it's always a pleasure to have you on. So tell us, as we're 3 days away from kickoff, what's the vibe you're getting from your sources, from yesterday's press conference, from the players about this team, and just general impressions as they get ready to kick it off on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's geared up and ready to go. Is kind of a typical deal for this team, just like it is with most teams. I mean, at this point, you're just ready to see somebody else. There's some position battles that are still going on, and some guys jockeying for playing time, so to speak. And it should still be a very good week of practice, I would hope, and ready to get this thing going. So it's been kind of a long camp, but it's been a good camp, and we'll see how that manifests on Saturday, because as we know, you don't really know what you got until the ball actually kicks off and you see somebody else out there.
That's right. Season openers kind of always in college football remind me of Forrest Gump. Mama always said life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So,
yeah.
So let's get into
that's
that.
more true. That's more true now than ever, because I mean, you always have so many new players coming in, whether it's by transfer portal or freshman class, and you just don't know. I mean, you think you know how Gage Larvadane's going to play because he's played 100 games of college football. Not that many, obviously, but he's played so much college football. But he hadn't played and he hasn't started an SEC game in front of 80,000 people before. I mean, you think he's going to be fine. You think Demetrius Knight's going to be fine. But it's just different. It's just different when you go out there on game day, and your expectations of knowing what you're going to get are a little bit higher for transfer guys and freshmen. But at the same time, when you have so many new starters, have so many new players, you just don't really know.
I mean, no doubt about it. So not only are you going to have a redshirt freshman as a starting quarterback, going off what you just said, John, I counted up, there could be 8 players on offense alone in the starting lineup for South Carolina that did not begin their careers at South Carolina. One of them being Joshua Simon, but 7 others that could be on the field that are transfers from other programs. And so with that being said, and some of them are older guys, a lot of them are older guys, some of them like Ben Drevius Jacobs, he's I guess a redshirt freshman because he didn't play a whole bunch at Florida State. And you could have a true freshman or up to 2 true freshmen in Josiah Thompson and Mazio Bennett, who are both have or listed beside their names. But there were 16 of those. But just 8 potential new players on offense, including Lenore Sellers. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean it's a big deal to bring in players and bring in talented players. It's also a big deal to see how those guys kind of come together and develop, because that's what you don't really know is how quickly they're gonna get on the same page, how quickly they're gonna mesh. You just don't really know that. I mean, I hate to change sports because it's not necessarily apples to apples, but South Carolina brought in a ton of transfers last year and a ton of new guys last year in basketball. And, they came together and played great ball, and they were awesome from day one through the end of the season. But they were picked to finish last in the SEC. Nobody knew what they had because it was so new, and it was easy to pick South Carolina last. And Arkansas brought in a ton of new players last year, like they've done before under their head coach, and they were picked by some people to win the league, certainly top 2 or 3 or 4 in the league, and they ended up finishing 12th or 13th in the league because that team just never had it, never came together. You thought you had something good, but you didn't really know. And it can be that way with football. I mean, you've seen examples of it in football before with Texas A&M buying their team and ended up getting their coach fired. So it's just a little bit unique now in terms of how things are going to come together. And I think you do have good leadership on that side of the football, and Luke Doty and Shane talked a little bit about it yesterday too, is how Lenoris has started to kind of become a leader of the team offensively, and his voice is certainly powerful. But it's a lot of new guys, and one thing I think is the offensive line in terms of how quickly they're going to come together, and I do think that it's a good thing that they played most of the snaps together as a group of ones in that last scrimmage, and we'll see how some of that stuff evolves. But I think so much, especially offensively, is how that 11 kind of clicks a little bit.
No doubt. And so potentially with that, Shane Beamer mentioned yesterday, Vershawn Lee was named the most outstanding player of preseason camp. I want to make sure to get that right because we know it's not fall in Columbia, South Carolina. But then beside him, potentially, you'll definitely have a sixth-year guy in Kamar Bell, who started his career at Auburn, was recruited there by Gus Malzahn, left, played for Tom Herman, the notorious kisser of players before each game at Florida Atlantic, and now at South Carolina. I know you know a little bit about Tom Herman, but that's probably a conversation for a different podcast. And then Torricelli Simpkins, even though there's an or by his name, I'm kind of expecting it to be the guys we've been talking about the most. That gives you 3 5th and 6th year guys on the interior and a 5th and 6th year guy on either side of inexperienced tackles who really, Josiah Thompson's never played in a college game, and Kason Henry hadn't played much. He started the North Carolina game and went out the first series and was out for the year. How valuable can those 3 inside guys be, those veterans, for those younger tackles?
Yeah. Kason Henry's watched a lot from the college football sideline, but yeah, he's certainly a new guy out there too at right tackle. But yeah, that's certainly a big deal. And talking with Lonnie Teasley some over the last month, and hearing from Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggins both, like the experience that they bring and the maturity they bring is a big reason that both of those guys have won starting jobs. And coaches have a tendency, not always, but have a tendency to lean towards old guys when they have that, when they have that option. And, it was a little bit painful to put in freshmen last year along the offensive line, but they didn't really have a choice. And sometimes it's a little bit painful to start freshmen when you want to, like they're. I mean, Josiah Thompson is probably going to start. He's going to play a lot, but sometimes if a guy's not that good, you go with older guys, but Josiah Thompson is that good, and I think with Bell and I think with Simpkins, they're leaning on old guys. They're good players, but they've been around the block a little bit. They've got that maturity, and we'll see how it evolves over the course of the season. But I think those two guys are going to get the nod, and having Vershawn Lee in there is certainly a big deal. He's been kind of the leader on the offensive line. Him and Nick Gargiulo a little bit last year, but really for 2 years. He's got a lot of respect in that room, and he's played pretty well depending on the position. He's played all over the place. In some spots, he's been better than others. But I think he's going to be really good at center.
All right, so with Casey Henry's injury history and with Ja'Kai Moore and Aaron Parks both going down, how big of a deal are those injuries, particularly Ja'Kai Moore? I mean, personally, I'm not hearing good things about him being back. Shane Beamer was kind of, well, he's out this week. We'll let you know if it changes, kind of thing. I mean, it's, to me, if it's what I've been told, it's really heartbreaking for a guy that lost his mom last year, battled injuries, came back, was healthy through the spring, and right up until, at whatever point of the second scrimmage when he got injured. I mean, if something happens to Casey Henry, it's probably most likely to me Vershawn Lee's going back to right tackle and Torricelli Simpkins would move to center and you'd slide Trevon Ball back into the starting role at right guard. I mean, we hope that doesn't happen, but what's your take on those two injuries at right tackle?
Yeah, I think you're probably right, at least in the short term. I mean, I don't know. I would think that you've got to try to get Tree going at right tackle and just kind of see what it looks like. And your depth obviously becomes really thin if you lose a tackle at some point before getting one back. And it sounds like it's going to be quite a while before either Moore or Parks get back, if either of them get back this year. And I think Parks probably stands a better chance, but I don't expect either one of them back for a little bit. So yeah, I mean, and when you know that, when you think that, when you know that, like, you've got to start preparing for any kind of scenario. And I do think that involves, throwing Tree out there and seeing what it looks like. But I think you're probably right in the short term. If something were to happen this weekend, that you probably see Vershawn go out there and the merry-go-round starts. But, you don't really want to change a whole bunch of guys and move a whole bunch of guys if you don't have to. You'd like to just plug one guy in and go. So that may not be an option this weekend. It may be an option this weekend. But, it's the same way in football as it is in baseball. Like, you don't want to start moving a whole bunch of guys around if you don't have to. It just makes every position a little bit weaker. There's a reason why you're starting at the position you're starting at, and I think Ball would be just fine at right guard, and I think that Simpkins would be just fine at center. But you start changing all these combinations, and it has an effect. And I would love to see somebody different go out there at right tackle if something happens with Kaysen, but we're not going to put that voodoo on him either. We'll pretend that he's going to be just fine out there at right tackle and see how it goes.
I mean, that's the hope. I mean, you hope for him because of, just how unfortunate, the beginning of his career's been. All right, so I mentioned the new starting quarterback, Lenore Sellers. Shane Beamer talked about his demeanor. You mentioned about how he's becoming a leader. You still going to have a sellout crowd at Williams-Brice Stadium for Old Dominion. I think that is a great thing. How much do you think Dow Loggins will want to lean on that offensive line in the run game? And then how much can the helmet comms help a guy like Lenore Sellers and other rule changes with probably Mike Shula on the sideline with the iPad in between series?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly going to be helpful, the helmet communication and iPad stuff. I think that probably is more important next week than it is this week in terms of just talking a guy through some things. But, with regards to the first part about leaning on the run game, I mean, I think that's what you have to do. Maybe you come out there chucking it around, but I think this team was so maligned last year offensively because of the run game. I think you just have to go out and do everything you can to establish it, get those offensive line guys going, get Rocket Sanders going. I mean, get Lenore Sellers going with his feet. I think you just have to do it that way. I mean, that was what killed South Carolina last year, and you've worked all offseason and made so many changes to what you've got, what you had going on from last year, that I think you just have to go out there and show that we can do this. I mean, you brought in a run game coordinator, you brought in a new running backs coach, you brought in 3 guys from the transfer portal, you brought in a talented freshman. You've done all these things to ensure that the running game is going to be improved. I think you got to go out there and run the football, and I think that starts play one with Rocket Sanders or Lenore Sellers. And some will say, well, that's what Old Dominion's expecting. Well, hell yeah, let them expect it. Just go run it on them anyway. You don't need to go play action pass just because Old Dominion thinks you're going to run. So I think that's what you have to do. That's my opinion. Obviously, we'll see how the game evolves. But I do think that that's going to be huge for South Carolina, not only against Old Dominion, but early in the season. You've got to show that you can run the football.
I mean, I completely agree. And so Shane Beamer was asked about Rocket Sanders, but John, how close do you think Rocket Sanders can be to the player we saw in 2022 at Arkansas? I mean, this is kind of like a contract year for him. He's wanting to show that he is that same guy for all the NFL scouts. But, I mean, I'm not saying he's got to rush for 1,400 yards, but even if he could rush for 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, and show that he's 85 to 95% of that guy, I think it would bode very well for South Carolina.
I agree with that 100%. I don't think that South Carolina needs Rocket Sanders to be what he was 2 years ago for South Carolina to be successful offensively and be very good offensively. Now, I do think it's important that he does, carry the ball a lot and for a lot of yards for him to, or for South Carolina's offense to be transformed. He might be just as good as he was 2 years ago and still not rush for quite as many yards. I mean, Arkansas is a little different than South Carolina in terms of what they want to do from a run game standpoint and how good their offensive line has been, how dedicated they've always been to running the football. So we'll kind of see how that evolves. But I think Rocket Sanders has put himself in a great position to have a great contract year, as you said. So I think he's in a good spot, and I think that he's going to have every opportunity to prove that as well. I think they're going to lean on him, not necessarily early on in the season, but in big moments. is with based on how they feel about him. I think that he's going to have every opportunity to go out there and make as many plays as he can. It's great to have Oscar Attaway and Jaworn Howell, DJ Braswell, Juju McDowell, and Michael Smith, or excuse me, Matthew Fuller, and whoever else. But there's only one Rocket Sanders. You've got him for 1 year, and he's going to have every opportunity to flex his muscle.
All right, so at wide receiver and tight end, the tight end depth chart is set. Brad Crawford was on last week. He said one of his sources inside the program told him Joshua Simon could be our best football player. If that's the case, if that is the case, could he kind of be, along with Michael Smith and Maurice Brown II, those guys kind of be a security blanket for Lenora Sellers in the passing game until everything really sorts itself out? And
Brady Hunt too. But yeah, I mean, I think so. Like with Josh, he was really good catching passes last year when he got opportunities, and I get it. Like Dowell Loggins and Spencer Rattler were both big fans of Trey Knox and had great rapport with Trey. Like, I mean, that's just part of it. Sometimes a quarterback and a receiver, tight end or otherwise, like just are on that same page and just click. And so I get it. But Josh Simon was a better tight end last year. He should have been playing more snaps. He should have gotten more opportunities. He got some. He should have gotten more. But I think he can be that way this year, and I think he did a fine job blocking and doing what he needed to in the run game. But I think that he could have been a little bit more physical, and I think he could have been a little bit better. And I do think that Sean Elliott has brought that a little bit to that tight end room. That's something that he's preached, and he's hinted very strongly that when he got here, the room just wasn't tough and physical enough. And that's something that he's tried to bring in there. So I think that's going to be beneficial to Josh and his overall development as a player in terms of strengthening some of the weaknesses, and especially Josh, but also the tight end room in general. So I think he's going to have a big year. Whoever told you that, I'm in full agreement with him. I don't know if he's the best player on offense, but he's a pretty darn good one. I think that'll be recognized over the course of the season and in some big moments.
Yeah, I mean, my response was, if he's better than Rocket Sanders and Nick Eamon-Worry and, Debo and Tonka Hemingway and guys like that, that definitely bodes well for South Carolina football. So switching to defense, John, this team, it looks night and day. I mean, there are the same guys: Debo Williams, Bam Martin Scott, Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, Nick Eamon-Worry, DQ Smith, O'Donnell Fortune. But the depth that's been shored up through the transfer portal and with guys like Dylan Stewart and Fred J.R. Johnson, what are your expectations for this defense? I mean, I kind of think that, with 6 defensive tackles and maybe 6, 7, 8 edge rushers and more linebackers than I can remember, that kind of, Clayton White's unit, they need to produce this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key word is depth. But, at the same time, it's got to be good depth. You can't just have a bunch of crap out there either and expect to be good. And if everybody's pretty similar, but they're really good, then you're going to have a great defense. If everybody's pretty similar and they're not very good, then you're not going to have a very good defense. But I do think that there are a lot of guys, especially in the front 7, who are talented and can make plays and play at a high enough level for South Carolina to be very good defensively. I do think depth is a little bit of an issue in the secondary, particularly at safety. There's certainly certainly the backups have not played a lot of college football, so there is it's unknown more so than untalented. I mean, if Akari Swain is a starter or a backup, to Judge Collier, like I think I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. He's talented. He's just not very experienced. And I think that they're going to be okay overall, but in the secondary. So, I'm pretty high on the defense. I do want to see some of these new guys play. A lot of these guys returning from last year are starters who were okay, who were pretty good, who certainly had some good moments, but South Carolina's defense certainly had some bad moments last year too. Hopefully everybody's raised their level of play a little bit, but you want good players. You don't want a whole bunch of bad players. Like if you go to Hardee's and get you some French fries, and you want those French fries to be hot and fresh and good. And if they give you two things of French fries just because they're all cold or they're all burned, like you don't want that. You don't want a whole bunch of bad. You just want some good. You just want some good. So I think that South Carolina's got some depth. I think they've got good depth, especially up front and on the defensive line and at linebacker. And I think that the defense is going to be solid. I'm reserving judgment on this elite defense that some folks are billing this as. You brought in some really good players. You have some really good players coming back, but apart from Nicky Manwari, there hadn't been a whole lot of elite out there at times. Old Donald Fortune's been great at covering. He hadn't been great at tackling. Like for South Carolina to have an elite defense, to have a top 3 or 4 defense in the league, like some guys are going to have to take some real steps forward. Like Kyle Kennard wasn't an all ACC player. Demetrius Knight wasn't an all Conference USA or whatever Charlotte is in. Like those guys have been good, but they're going to have to take steps forward too for South Carolina to be an elite defense. But I do think it's going to be a good defense.
All right, so I will fact check you on that last one. He was first team All American Athletic Conference last year.
Well, so he wasn't first team All Conference USA.
That's right, he was not.
I thought, as I was saying that, I thought he might have been second team, but good on him for being first team. But we'll see how that translates to this level, and I think it will. I think it will, but some of these guys are going to have to step up and play a little bit better. Maybe I should have said Bengali Kamara wasn't a first team All ACC player. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that one.
You are most definitely correct, as you are 99.9% of the time. So we'll give you the grace on that. So William in the chat box asked, do you expect more 3-3-5 than 4-2-5? And I'm kind of been bringing that up as well, because you have so many more players up front than you had, particularly edge rushers. To me, it's going to be interesting. And then my question is, from what you're hearing, how special can Dylan Stewart be even this year? Not even talking about over the course of his career, if he is 100% healthy.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I would be lying to you if I could tell you, listen, I know this. Like, they've been telling me what exactly they're going to do, and because they haven't. But I can read some tea leaves and think that they're going to it's obviously going to be week by week related, right? Like what is the other opponent doing? What fits how you want to stop them best is obviously going to depend week to week. But I think they're going to be a little bit more 4-2-5 heavy this year, and for a few reasons, like we've already talked about, like the depth along the defensive line is great. You're you've got some guy. I think your personnel just fits having 4 up front a little bit better. And then you look at the depth chart, and they list four defensive linemen. Like last year, especially at the end of the season, they were listing outside linebacker. They were basically listing a 3-3-5. So that's a little bit of an indication there too. But and I think you feel good about 5 of your linebackers, maybe 6. But you start running three linebackers out there the whole time, and maybe one of them's not quite ready. Maybe a Fred Johnson isn't quite ready to play as many snaps. Maybe somebody gets hurt. I just feel like you're probably going to see a little bit more 4-2-5 over when you look at the balance of the season versus the 3-3-5. But you're going to certainly see it in certain situations. You're going to see it more in certain games than others. But to pick one of those two, which takes more snaps, I think you're going to see more 4 up front.
I mean, I agree. I think it could look more or a lot like Charlie Strong's defense when you have a bigger guy out there that can be standing up, that can play in space, like Dylan Stewart or even Gilbert Edmond or Bam Martin Scott, or Demetrius Knight, who's 245 pounds, to where on third down they can put their hand in the dirt, or they can stand up or stack off and play in space or blitz. I think Clayton White has a lot of options to be multiple this year.
Yeah, and I mean that's what Clayton White is built his defense on historically, is the 4-2-5 and having the nickel in there and playing off of that. And you've got a pretty good one in Jelon Kilgore with that spot. So I mean I think that's just kind of what you're going to see most of. Last year's team needed a kick in the butt on defense, and that's how they played well. And that was last year's team. That's going is we noted earlier, with teams changing so much based on portal and whatnot. Like every team's going to be a little bit different. They probably think that this year's team is probably a little bit better with 4.
All right, so before I let you go, I want to get if you have one concern or question mark for offense or defense as we get ready to head into the season opener, give us one from each side.
Yeah, I mean it's broad, but at the same time, the offensive line is going to be a question mark until it isn't. I mean that's just the way it's been around here. There've been too many issues up front for too long. That's not all on Lonnie Teasley. That's not all on Greg Atkins. It's just how it's been here. And I do think that recruiting has been better. You've got more talented players up there. We'll see how well they've been coached this offseason and how ready they are to go. Obviously, last year injuries were a big part of it, but with my concern is going to be the offensive line until it isn't. I'm not so worried about Lenoris. I'm not so worried about wide receiver, tight end, running back. I'm not so worried about play calling. I'm worried about the offensive line being able to execute everything that the offense needs them to execute. Defensively, I think the biggest thing that could derail South Carolina on that side of the football is having problems back at safety, because then what happens is if Nicky Manwari goes down, like no team can really afford to lose their best player. But I think you're a little bit too thin at the safety position, and then you move Jelon Kilgore back there, and that changes nickel, where you've got a Kelvin Hunter or J. Lewis Solomon, and then you've got a basically rookie starting cornerback at the other spot. Like I just worry a little bit about depth in the secondary overall and the impact that could have over the course of the season. I don't necessarily know that that gets South Carolina early, But I do think that could pose a problem at some point. And it's not that those players are bad. It's just we don't know if they're good.
All right, John. Good stuff. Great stuff. As always, I know you got to be happy for your guy, Whit Merrifield. He's tearing it up for the Braves. But it's really football season. Be well, my friend. I can't thank you enough for being so gracious with your time. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. And hopefully this game is not anything close to what Georgia Tech and Florida State had to open their seasons.
Well, if it is, you hope you're Georgia Tech and not Florida State, because you can recover from an ugly victory. It's hard to recover from a bad loss. So, but yeah, and to your point, I'm stoked for Whit Merrifield, and Whit Merrifield and Jonah Bride are two of my favorite people to ever come through the baseball program, and Jonah's doing one hell of a job with the Marlins right now too. So I'm really happy for both of those guys. Glad to see that they're crushing the ball as the season comes to an end. That'll benefit both of those guys very much going forward. So two great people, two obviously great ball players, and certainly happy for them. But I think they'll probably be thinking more about the Gamecocks than they will knowing how big of football fans both of those guys are. I think they will be thinking more about South Carolina football this Saturday than maybe anything else going on. So, but certainly happy for them.
All right, John. Be well, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Thanks again.
I appreciate you, Keith.
All right, that was John Whittle, and now we go right back out to the capital city and bring in our guy from Go Gamecocks and the state, Jordan Kaye, and this will be his first season opener for the Gamecocks. I think he came in a little after that last year. Jordan, how you been?
It's good. Going good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So let's jump in. Your thoughts on Shane Beamer's press conference yesterday, the tone he set, and maybe two or three key takeaways from what the head coach had to say leading into the season opener.
I thought it was a pretty boring overall press conference. I don't know if anyone else thought differently. I guess the only thing I thought was interesting is they don't seem to have to be set at a lot of positions. There is still so much in flux with this football team, and it might take 3-4 weeks before some of these positions are ironed out. Wide receiver, he said they're going to play 9 guys, which isn't crazy. Last year they had played, I think 10 different guys caught a pass at one point. Playing 9 guys at wide receiver is not unknown, but it's they have no idea who their top 3 wide receivers are. No clue. That's kind of, I don't know if that's concerning. It could be good because, you give everyone a fair shot and see who earns it. That's fine. Then on the defensive line, I think he said there's going to be 7 defensive linemen or 6 defensive tackles that play. That's crazy. Again, not a bad thing. You're going to have tons of rotation. Guys are going to be staying fresh. That's the position where you really can just do the hockey shifts and go couple plays, and everyone gets to play. So that's fine. But yeah, it's just interesting. It's they don't, I think they're so open. And you can either read that as they feel really, really good about the guys they have and the depth is going to be unbelievable, or, there's no stars at a lot of positions and there's a lot of guys kind of right at the same level. Okay, so
I know you're still kind of a newcomer when it comes to Shane Beamer and his depth charts, but I'll be honest, I don't know that thing's worth the piece of paper that it's printed on.
Sure.
I think it's for the fans and for the media and to keep. I know your article, there are 16 oars listed on that depth chart. Kudos to you for counting those up so I didn't have to, because that'd be a struggle with my lower Pickens County public education. But, I mean, do we really think Juju McDowell is the second best running back? I mean, I think the offensive line is set and has been set. And part of it,
over a week,
as Clayton White mentioned last year, or last week rather, about protecting players' egos, and staying together for as long as possible. Plus, frankly, it gets old to me. All those guys should be playing.
Yeah.
Especially in the second half.
100%. Yeah. I didn't think about it more as so much as the depth chart is what Beamer was saying during the press conference, where he was saying, 9 guys are going to play here and 6 guys are going to play here. And, not really naming anyone by name. And so you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, that depth chart was, I would have said it was horrible, but then I saw Tennessee put out one with 33 oars, and I was like, you know what? South Carolina actually did a pretty good job. So yeah, I agree. That thing is a little silly. It's just kind of funny to look at sometimes because you're like, what? Like, who is this for? But yeah, you're right. They have to protect some ego. There's a level of gamesmanship to it too. So I get it.
All right, so I'll flip the coin and ask you, going as we approach the season opener, based off your sources, what you're hearing from the players. What do you feel maybe most confident about for South Carolina on offense and on defense going into this opener?
I feel really confident about Rocket Sanders being good. Everything we've heard is the guy looks better than he ever did. And you have to know that there are guys like Dowell Loggins and a couple of the GAs and some other people who were like with Rocket Sanders in 2022 and got to experience, what a 1,500-yard sophomore running back looked like. So they have a pretty good frame of reference. And he was like 245 pounds last year. He's dropped like almost 20 pounds and put it, gained lean muscle. So, I mean, this is a different body build of Rocket Sanders. He basically spent every morning, like coming in at like 5 a.m. to rehab. I just think he's going to be spectacular. And if he doesn't get injured, I think I made the prediction that he's going to go for over 1,200 yards. Like, I really do think that's possible, especially, at Arkansas, he had a dual threat quarterback in the backfield with him in KJ Jefferson. Well, every defense has to account for KJ Jefferson in the run game, and all that's going to do is open up things for Rocket Sanders. So it's the same thing with Lenore Sellers. Teams are going to have to look at Lenore Sellers in the run game. They're going to have to put a linebacker maybe as a spy or kind of just watch him. It's going to open up things for Rocket Sanders. I just think I think the offensive line is going to be better. That's going to help Rocket Sanders. Lenore Sellers is in there. That's going to help Rocket Sanders. I just expect him to be really, really good. On the defensive side, I just think Dylan Stewart is going to have like 6 sacks, like 6 to 8 sacks. I just think he's going to have like 2 or 3 plays this season where people just shake their head and just like, holy crap, this looks like a little skinnier Marcus Jadeveon Clowney. And that's going to be so fun to watch, I think. Speaking of that depth chart, yeah, he was like the 3rd stringer or something, and I was like, we'll see how long that lasts. There might be some plays or games where you don't see him on the field or whatever, but then there's going to be a couple where someone makes him mad and you're going to see a crazy hit or something. I just think Dylan Stewart is going to play a factor, and that whole edge room with Kyle Kennard and Gilbert Redmond. I mean, they're really deep and they're really good. We saw how good Georgia Tech was. Well, Kyle Kennard was Georgia Tech's best defensive player last year, and now he's coming off the edge for South Carolina. Gilbert Redmond was on Florida State and looks the part. So I think that edge room is going to have a lot of sacks, if not just getting to the quarterback.
So one player that got a lot of hype last year in the preseason and then suffered a high ankle sprain, the week of the season opener or maybe the week before that, and, they rushed him back because they had no choice. JT Gear, the Syracuse transfer, who's a South Carolina native, he's listed, as a potential starter on the other side. How much credence do you put into that? Because to me, I think everybody's been expecting Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond, and/or Dylan Stewart, two of those three guys to be starters in week one.
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard JT Gear's name more than like one time all of preseason camp from anyone. So I saw his name on there and I was like, I did a double take. I was like, who? Just because I wasn't here last year, I had never like heard his name because he was out for most of the year. And then I didn't really hear about him in the spring, didn't really hear about him in the fall. And then he's like popped up on the depth chart. I was like, oh crap, wow. So yeah, I don't know exactly how much credence I give to it. It is one of those odd depth charts. We'll see. I mean, I think he was one of those guys who was going to play. I just thought he was like below Dylan Stewart, which maybe he is in a real depth chart. But we'll see. I mean, he is going to get a play. I know he did come in with a lot of hype. One of those South Carolina guys, has played big time college football before. So we'll see. It would be easy too. When I say I hadn't heard his name, well, there are like 4 other guys in his room that have a lot more hype and excitement around than he does. I mean, you have Dylan Stewart, you have Kyle Kennard, you have Gilbert Edmond. Granted, people, myself included, were asking about those guys because I'm interested in them. I wasn't necessarily asking about JT here. So maybe it's just one of those things that slipped through the cracks, and he is going to be a stud this year. We'll see. I mean, he is going to play. So now I'll make sure I'm really keying into when he comes into the game and I get to see him.
Yeah, and honestly, Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy that just had not been big enough, but now at 247 pounds, and almost 6'3", with NFL bloodlines. His dad was an NFL player. He's flashed at times. I really think he can be more of a factor this year as opposed to previous years when I just was like, man, this guy's just not big enough. But now he's big, he's athletic, and he does have a good get off. And I mean, so that's like 6 guys that we're talking about. Yeah. And to me, that's a blessing for South Carolina because last year, you had guys playing on one leg and you had 0 depth. Guys were getting gassed because they're playing 80 snaps a game. That should not be the case this season, particularly in the front 7 part of the team.
100%. Yeah.
All right. So
no, go for it.
Okay. So going back to offense, I counted up to potentially, when you factor in Lenore Sellers is making his first start, but you also have potentially as many as 8 new players that will start for South Carolina on Saturday afternoon. With a sellout crowd, it's the most fans Old Dominion will have ever played in an environment like that. How concerning is it to have that many new players, transfers, freshmen like Josiah Thompson and Mazeo Bennett, but you've also got a lot of transfer guys. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's that concerning. I just think we're in a new age of college football where this is going to be the reality. I also think it's a good reason to not schedule a crazy game as your opener. I'm a little scared, next year South Carolina's opening with Virginia Tech in Atlanta. Like, that's the game I don't want, But if you're playing Old Dominion at home, it's a nice way to ease into the season a little bit while also still having like a somewhat decent opponent. It's not like Wofford. So I'm not worried. I think 5 years ago, I would have said this is a massive concern and things are going to go wrong. But now it's just like, this is what happens in college football. Maybe you don't have 8 guys, but I mean, I would dare to think that most teams are going to have 5, 6 new guys on almost every side of the ball, just with the transfers, with guys leaving for the draft, with guys transferring out. There's so much turnover that I just don't think it's as big of a deal anymore.
All right, so we talked about this with John. He expects South Carolina to lean on the run game because you want to.
Yeah.
You were very porous last year. You have a bunch of new guys and guys that are have been in the program, like Vershawn Lee, Kason Henry, but who's been injured his whole career.
Yeah.
But with Rocket Sanders and with an opponent, an SEC road game in week 2, I mean, there's 2 schools of thought, but I think you want to be just running your base plays and you want to line it up and run it and run it and run it and run it and run your basic pass routes and play good defense and special teams and play the reserves, from midway through the third quarter through the end of the game and get out of there healthy and not having shown Kentucky even a third of your playbook.
Yeah, I totally agree. You kind of want that spring game playbook, just incredibly vanilla, maybe like 1 or 2 little wrinkles. But yeah, save everything for Kentucky. Now you got to have a little backup plan. If you get into the second half and it's a 1-score game, throw that out the window. Open up everything. So you got trick plays, put those in, do whatever you got to do. But you're right, like, you got to, that Kentucky game, I mean, arguably biggest game of the season. I mean, that's a make or break for this South Carolina campaign. You have to win that game, and you don't want guys to get caught looking ahead. But I think it's okay sometimes for coaches to look ahead, like, hey, we got to plan a little strategically for this. So I totally agree with you. Run the ball, get your offensive lineman, which is going to have basically 4 new starters. Because I'm kind of counting Kason Henry as a new starter. I mean, he was just hardly played at all last year. Vershawn Lee also is playing a new position. I mean, realistically, you could make an argument like it's a brand new offensive line. No one that really has much continuity. Get those guys comfortable. Get Rocket Sanders back into the flow of things. Let Oscar Attaway and some of these guys get reps, and then let Sellers just kind of do what he does. I mean, he's going to scramble, and that's not even going to be stuff in the playbook. You're also just get your wide receivers confidence. Throw them little bubble screens. Throw them little slants. Like, you don't need to, take these home run shots down the field. Just let your wide receiver catch passes. Let them get into the groove of being an SEC receiver and playing in front of 80,000 people in Williams-Brice Stadium. I totally agree with you. Keep it simple. Keep it vanilla. Get out with a win and head into Kentucky with your playbook still a secret.
All right, so how much 2 tight end sets versus 3 wide receivers do you expect to see? Because with, Joshua Simon, who I had Brad Crawford, the 24/7 National College Football writer on. Mm-hmm. One of his sources inside the program said Joshua Simon could be our best football player. I mean, to me, if that's true, that bodes very well for South Carolina because of Rocket Sanders and Nick Emanwari and Tonka Hemingway and guys like that. But you got, Michael Smith has gotten a lot of preseason hype, as has Maurice Brown the second, I think, because he was a walk-on and just a special teams player. But Brady Hunt has kind of been the forgotten guy at tight end. But I think he starts in the 2 tight end set. And I think that helps the run game and gives you essentially like 4 wide receivers, because even though those guys are big, they can run and they are, have excellent hands. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. I don't know the exact percentage. I think some of that's just going to come down to how well it's working. Also, what play they're calling. If you're calling a run play, maybe it's a good idea to have that in there. But you're right. Like, these tight ends, I mean, we almost have to stop thinking about them as tight ends and just think of them as just pass catchers. And we just put all the tight ends and all the wide receivers in one bucket and we call them pass catchers. Like, Joshua Simon maybe is number 1. Like, he's the guy I trust the most to catch a pass. So when you think about it that way, put your best players on the field. And right now you start looking at that pass catcher bundle. Okay, your best players are these tight ends. I mean, Michael Smith, every time I talk to someone about Michael Smith, it is like I can't believe what this guy just did. Like, I can't believe what this guy is doing. And it's crazy because he came in, he didn't even get the whole spring. He didn't get the winter workouts, the spring ball. Like, he literally just showed up in July, did the little bit of the summer workouts, and then participated in preseason camp. But he's like 6'6", 255, like, as an 18-year-old. It's unbelievable. And so, and then you forget about Brady Hunt too. So those 3 dudes are going to be 3 of your better pass catchers, and they're going to have to be utilized in those 2 tight end sets. And, we could see Dow Loggins even get creative where, could we see Michael Smith just line up as a wide receiver? I feel like he'd line up in the slot, and, technically we call it a 2 tight end set, but maybe South Carolina doesn't think of it as a 2 tight end set. They just think of it as like, hey, let's just put this guy in a wide receiver position. So, I'm curious to see the percentage of how many times they're in, that personnel grouping versus the 3 wide receivers.
I mean, I agree. I had a source inside the program tell me that he said at some point this season, Michael Smith, if he's not already our best weapon on offense, he will be.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
I've heard the same things.
I mean, it's high praise for sure. So let's talk about special teams, because, there has been concern. We've talked about it in the past. I was really kind of surprised to see Juju McDowell listed as both the kick returner and the punt returner. I thought, Jalen Kilgore, Vakari Swain, Gage Larvadane, some of those guys could be in the mix for punt return and kickoff return, plus some of your running backs.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts when you saw that? And I guess the only thing they didn't list is who's going to kick off.
No, they did. It was Herrera.
Rogers. Yeah, we all knew Hunter Rogers and Kai Kroger were going to start. Everything else up in the air.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really care about it too much. I just think the way college football is, I don't want my guys returning kicks anyway. There's not many times you're going to return a punt. Maybe 8 times a year. You're hardly going to return a kick. It's just not that big of a deal to me. And if it allows, Nick Harper or Gage Larvadane or some of these other guys to not have to worry about that extra responsibility, just give it to Juju McDowell. I would also it was also bizarre how they went about choosing this. And I got to ask Jody Camillus or Shane Beamer, I have seen a lot of football practices. Normally, there's like 3 guys who like go between being like the kickoff returner and like 3 guys maybe a punt returner. It's usually like a lot of the same people. So you're talking about like maybe 6 people who like are trying out or whatever. South Carolina had like 20 guys. Like, I'm not joking. It was like 8, 15, 20 guys who, for the first like 2 weeks of preseason camp, there were like 12 guys lining up as like the kickoff return. And I don't know if they were trying out, if they were just trying to keep them busy or what, but it was the most bizarre thing where you're like, do they really have no clue who's going to be like returning kicks? Are they just giving everyone a fair shot? It was so bizarre. So I don't know how they decided upon that, what they were looking for. Maybe Juju McDowell is just the guy with the best hands who'd never dropped one of the punts or the kickoffs. I don't know. I mean, he's small, he's shifty, he can hide behind some of the blockers. We'll see. I don't think it's that big of a deal because, I just don't know how many times you're going to even see him run the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say, when the media boys, as Spurrier called them, certainly there are females in that bunch now. When they're out there, it's just for show. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Duke's Mayo Bowl.
Sure. Usually don't put on.
I mean, it's 15 minutes.
Yeah. Still, it was really weird. Yeah, it was still really weird. You can put on a show with 5 people. They were putting on a show. They were putting on a show with like 20 people. It was very weird. So I had never seen that before.
I mean, that is a lot of guys, no doubt about it. So, give me your breakout player for offense and breakout player for defense for this year.
Breakout player for offense. I mean, we've talked about the tight ends, but let's go to one of the wide receivers. I think Gabe Larvadain is going to be good. He's really, really, really fast. He had a game at Miami of Ohio last year where they played UMass and hit almost 300 yards receiving, like 7 touchdowns. He can move around in different wide receiver positions. I would love to see him in a 100-meter dash versus Nick Harper because I think it would actually be kind of close. He's a really interesting prospect. I'm not sure how much, like, what he knows of the playbook, only being here for an off season. I'm not sure much about him, but when you watch the film of him at Miami of Ohio, like, you kind of get excited, especially understanding how strong Lenore Sellers' arm is, that he can make the 55-yard, 60-yard pass down the field. If that guy can beat a cornerback off the line, I mean, he could have a step or two on his receiver. I think of that Tyshawn Russell pass last year that Sellers had against Furman. Like, why couldn't that be Gabe Larvadain? So if there's a guy that I'm betting on to be the leading wide receiver in receiving yards, I would say Gabe Larvadain. How big of a breakout is he with the team that I really like their tight ends and running backs? I don't know, but I expect him to have 1 or 2 games where you kind of get excited. On the defensive side, I mean, I kind of mentioned Dylan Stewart, so I'll go to Bam Martin Scott. This is a kid in his last season, has like hardly played at South Carolina when, like, all things considered. Was at a JUCO for a little bit, like kind of flown under the radar. He's been in school for like 6 years. Just a kind of a wild story. And finally, it looks like he's going to start a game in the SEC. And I just think with the 3-3-5 that's going to be being used more, he's going to get more opportunities to kind of shine a little bit. We'll see how much he rushes the passer, but I just think he's going to be a really versatile dude alongside Debo Williams in that linebacker unit. And he's going to have a couple of games this season where people are saying, hey, maybe he should have played a little bit more last year. So Those are my two dudes.
All right, so with all of the depth and the older guys South Carolina has added at linebacker, at defensive tackle, at that defensive end position, and a guy like Dylan Stewart, you're returning 4 of your 5 starters in the secondary. You're really strong at nickel and safety. Quite frankly, I thought Judge Collier played just as good, if not better, when he was out there than O'Donnell Fortune did last year.
Yeah.
And we all saw what Bakari Swain did in the spring game. I mean, Clayton White was on the verge last year, the week of going into the Kentucky game. I had really a great source that told me he was on his way out. And then those last 2 games, they made the switch. Shane Beamer reconsidered. But when you look at the depth and the amount of talent South Carolina has on their defense this season, how much pressure is on Clayton White, not to have an elite defense, but just, I think if South Carolina's defense just can be somewhere in that middle part of the pack in the SEC and get off the field on 3rd downs, stop the run game and certainly be better against the pass than you were last year because you just got lit up. I mean, I still have nightmares about Tulu, whatever his last name is, from Mississippi State, just lighting up. I mean, and they had DQ Smith at the nickel guarding that guy when he runs a 4.3 40, and Clayton White never adjusted. I mean, those were the things that were concerning. Then, they kept, well, let's try Nick Eamon-Warry. Well, now Kilgore, he's played several games. Let's move him. Now let's go to the 3-3-5. I mean, it was evolving. And, there's no excuse for Graham Mertz to come into Williams-Brice Stadium and absolutely light you up like that. I mean, fair or unfair, is Clayton White, how hot is his seat going into this season?
I think it's warm. Obviously, if South Carolina has a bottom 5 defense in the SEC and they miss out on a bowl game, I mean, Shane Beamer's going to have to do something. Someone's going to have to take the ball a little bit. And I think last year Clayton White probably saved his job by evolving. You go into those last 4 games. I mean, the defense the last 4 games was not the problem. I mean, think about it. I don't think if I remember right, they didn't allow a touchdown to Clemson. They really started to turn the corner when he introduced the 3-3-5, something that, they had that package. But, I mean, this is a guy who basically built his entire career off the 4-2. That's his bread and butter. Like, he does not want to go away from that too much. And all of a sudden you start introducing the 3-3-5 a little bit more and getting some guys like Bam Martin-Scott, who's like, why was this guy on the sideline for the whole season? And he starts shining a little bit. And all of a sudden your edge guys start shining a little bit. And you're kind of looking at it like, part of you is like, why did this take so long? But, you got to give credit to him evolving. I don't think Shane Beamer liked firing coaches. Think about it. He fired 1 coach his entire time in South Carolina. Like, that's a guy who, it's not like they're winning 10 games, not like they're winning 11 games. I mean, he does not like to fire coaches. And Clayton White, probably saved himself by having a fantastic last 4 games. But it's seats warm. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If this is a bad season and South Carolina has arguably the most defensive talent they've had under Shane Beamer, especially in the fronts, and you can't do anything with that, I mean, it's a hard sell to bring Clayton White back after that. And I think Shane Beamer probably would make a change. I don't think that happens, though. I think this defense is going to be a lot better. I think their personnel is so much better than last season. In the fronts, they have more depth. I just think they're going to be better. Clayton White has shown to evolve, shown to incorporate new things into his defense that he's willing to change, and I think things will be better. But you're right. If things go south, he's probably the guy that falls on the sword a little bit.
All right. Well, great stuff. I know you got to get to the coordinator's press conference. So do we expect to hear from Joe DeCamillis today? Is that, been a release?
I don't think so, because no, it just says offensive defensive coordinator press conference. That's what it was last week. So I don't think we hear from Joe DeCamillis. Maybe we should start advocating for that. Maybe once we get into the season, he actually has stuff to talk about. But yeah, I would like to hear from the Pete Lembo interviews last year were like 30 minutes of pop culture and history. So if Joe D can bring 50% of that, I'll be I'd love to have him in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a contrast to go from Clayton White to Pete. I mean, I thought Clayton White looked so nervous and uptight last week. I don't think you could have, to quote my dad, you couldn't have drove a 10-penny nail up his hind parts with a sledgehammer. I mean, he just does not look comfortable at all. I mean, am I missing that? What's it like in person?
I just don't think he loves doing like the media, especially how like South Carolina sets it up where, he's in front of a podium. It looks like he's teaching a class, like the way they have it set up. It is very uncomfortable. And unless you've like done it before or done it, it is very weird. But you get Clayton White like off to the side, and he actually is a very good talker. So I'll blame that one more on the setting. He's got a light shining in his eye, a camera right on him. Everyone's sitting above him. It is very odd. So, yeah, I will say it is very stark contrast from like Pete Lembo or even the way, Dal Loggins talks.
All right. So tell me, what's the burning question that you have for Dal Loggins and the question you have for Clayton White? I
don't know that we have any burning questions right now. Like, you talk to these guys plenty. I got to see some football before I have some burning questions. I want to see what it looks like on the field.
All right. Well, hey.
Thank you, Keith.
I can't thank you enough. Yeah, thank you, Jordan. I can't thank you enough for being with us and for being so gracious with your time. Be well. And have you got a season forecast or a prediction for this game?
I said I'm optimistic. I said South Carolina goes 7-5. I think they beat Old Dominion by 14 to 17 points. So I think ODU covers the spread though.
Yeah, I mean, you just want to get out of there with a good win and be healthy for week 2 going to Lexington. To me, that's all that matters.
Doesn't matter. Yep.
All right. Thanks, Jordan. We'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. All right. That was the State's Jordan Kaye bringing it as he always does. I'm kind of thinking maybe 34-13, 34-14, something along those lines. I did have a few notes that we didn't get to because I wanted to get right into it with John. So among the visitors that will be at Williams-Brice Stadium this Saturday, I'm not counting the 26 guys, but 2025 athlete. He's kind of a wide receiver, kind of a tight end, 6'3.5", 220-pound Mikael Skinner. He's visiting South Carolina. He has an offer. He's committed to Cincinnati, but it's really probably Kentucky and South Carolina right now. he's going to get to see the Gamecocks play their first 2 games. He'll follow up his visit to Williams-Brice Stadium with a trip to Lexington, Kentucky, and certainly a Gamecock win would really matter rather bigly next week. And I have to think, Malik Clark, all the buildup, all the hype with FSU and Georgia Tech just absolutely runs it down their throat. 190 yards rushing for the Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech. And so I think that helps South Carolina. And I think you'd really like to add both of those guys, because you will lose Joshua Simon. He is, I believe, cousins with Jaleel Skinner. Craig has that in the Nana's Porch chat box, as well as going to see Paul Maneri last night, and he's ready to get back to Omaha. I mean, Ray Tanner kind of pulled a rabbit out of the hat with that one. So we got some predictions for breakout player. Craig's got Jared Brown at wide receiver. Nick Harbor potentially running back. Kicks, I agree, Craig. I think Michael Smith will be an all SEC freshman. Craig's got the Gamecocks winning 31-10. Jared's got 35-21. Maybe they hit that late score against, the walk-ons and the reserves late. But I'm with Craig and others. Run the ball. Play good defense. I want to see a clean operation. To me, that's the most important thing. When you got a bunch of new guys playing for the first time with a sellout crowd at Williams-Brice Stadium, limit your pre-snap penalties. Don't go out there and have a bunch of false starts. Run a clean operation. That's what I want to see from Lenora Sellers. Help, I think the helmet comms, if you want to go fast, you can be on talking to your offensive coordinator up until you snap the ball, as long as you snap it with more than 15 seconds left on the play clock. And play good defense. Fly around. Be physical. You are an SEC team. Look like an SEC team. Don't give up third downs. Get off the field. Be clean on special teams. To me, I want to see the operation of the game. To me, that's the most important thing in a season opener. And then you have to expect the unexpected, because they have new players. You have a bunch of new players. You haven't played a game. Neither have they. And I don't really think anybody expected Montana State to outscore New Mexico 21-0 in the fourth quarter and come back and win that game. SMU was down big at Nevada and outscored them 16-0 and had to throw the game-winning touchdown pass with a minute and change to go on 3rd and 8, by the way, about a 35-yard touchdown pass. And nobody expected Florida State, with all the transfers they had and the returning players, to even be in a close game against Georgia Tech. So, to me, be clean on offense. Limit your penalties, particularly pre-snap penalties. Be physical. Run the ball. Be accurate in the passing game. You're not going to be perfect. End every possession with a kick. Don't turn the ball over. Create turnovers. Create some plays in special teams. And be physical on defense. And I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. And we'll be back tomorrow with Gamecock Pod Daily, counting it down. I think everybody can guess 2 days from kickoff. I'll go ahead and just say nobody's worn that number in a while. But I saw that guy play in person. I was in school with him, and I watched him play his senior season and was at a couple of those games and watched him in the NFL. So special thanks to John Whittle and to Jordan Kaye for being on today, and to all of you who are watching live on YouTube or Twitter. Thanks for tuning in. If you would like more of this podcast, follow us on Twitter at KAllsep. Follow me or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. You can go to the top of the homepage and click the link. You can get a month of podcasts every single day, Monday through Friday. Plus, you get the morning after. I surprise our patrons with a morning after edition for week 0 to recap the games and talk about the Gamecocks. And you get something you can't get anywhere else, and that is the Garnet and Black Town Hall every Tuesday. It's a live interactive Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. So join our growing Gamecock community. We've had several sign-ups, as we always do during football season. I think basketball is going to be much more exciting this year because you will have expectations. But for now, we're focused on Carolina football, and I'm fired up and ready to go for Saturday afternoon. So for John Whittle, and thanks to all of you and Jordan Kaye, this is Keith Allsep saying God bless, go Gamecocks. And for all our patrons and our growing Gamecock family, I'll be back tomorrow as we continue to count down to kickoff. Go Gamecocks, and God bless all of you